All right, here we go again. Planning staff is going to lead us in our next municipal-wide land use planning discussion, and today the topics that we are going to cover are tiny homes, short-term rentals, public health setbacks, open space dedication, and signage. And I'll turn it over to Reed Shepard, our Deputy Director of Planning, to lead that. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much. Let's get right into it. I'll just do a brief recap, and then we'll get into those topics. Don't think we need to cover the background. We all know kind of where the context of why this project is in place. Just to jump right into the recap from last week. So there was a discussion on several different zoning matters. The first one was around the mixed-use service zone. Second piece was around rural subdivisions and a zone for that. The next thing we covered was getting direction around villages and hamlets. And then we touched on the drinking water supply areas, so drinking water zoning. The last two being conservation zones, and then finally the future use zones, so zones that were not shown on the map. So we received direction from all of those pieces last week, which will be incorporated into draft number 2 in the new year. But let me just hand it over to Rosemary, who's going to start us off with tiny homes.
So a tiny house is defined in the Nova Scotia Building Code requirements as a dwelling unit that is 37 meters squared or less in building area. We are not required to regulate tiny houses through the minimum planning requirements. However, there is a provincial statement of interest on housing, the goal of which is to provide housing opportunities to meet the needs of all Nova Scotians. Among other provisions, the statement states that municipal planning documents must provide for manufactured housing, and tiny houses can be manufactured, modular, or constructed on property. In draft 1, we took the approach of treating all dwelling units the same. In other words, we didn't distinguish dwelling units by type or form in the permitted uses table. Similar to the approach in draft 1, a tiny house, regardless of how it was made, could be treated the same as other dwelling units and permitted wherever residential uses are allowed. So that brings us to the options. The first option is similar to what I just mentioned. We could treat tiny houses as dwelling units and permit them as a right in zones that permit residential uses. So this would represent minimum planning. In other words, it wouldn't place additional regulations on tiny houses. It wouldn't treat them any different than, say, a single-family home. The second option is to treat tiny houses as their own separate use and regulate them different from other dwelling units. In other words, regulating aspects of tiny houses such as requiring a development permit to ensure the presence of a permanent foundation or adequate septic. So the recommended option is option 1 for simplicity. Option 2 poses the risk of unfairly discriminating against a specific type of housing by adding more barriers for those looking to live in a tiny house, which can be more affordable. And so for that reason, we recommend option 1.
Thank you. And I forgot to outline before they presented, what we'll do with each topic is have staff present a brief background, the options, we'll have a brief discussion, and then give direction by way of show of hands. So any questions regarding tiny homes? Councillor Bell.
Thank you. In option 1, if an individual wants to locate a tiny house on an existing property, are we allowing them to hook into an on-site septic system that is already there, assuming that Department of Environment is happy with that?
So in option 1, we wouldn't be checking that they had an adequate septic system from a municipal perspective.
Yeah, maybe just to clarify, if it's built under the building code, it would have to have a septic system. The same processes would be required for any type of housing. If it was on wheels, it's not considered necessarily under the building code and doesn't necessarily follow that same process. So it depends whether it's built on a foundation and built under the building code or not.
I am supportive of the tiny homes because I think that they provide relief for a lot of people who may be living in the woods had they not had this opportunity. So I think that in many cases they could tie into an existing septic system because they would be considered an extra bedroom to the existing house. Where I've seen problems, not here but in the valley, is where someone locates a tiny home, hooks into a septic system, and then some building inspector says, well, you've set that on a cement slab. Is it a reinforced slab? Does it have, they made more fuss about the cement slab when he could have put it on a couple building blocks and they wouldn't say anything. I want us to be able to accommodate these type of homes and stay out of the way. Because to a lot of people, this is the best step up from living in a tent or a trailer. So I want to be supportive, and so I want to be able to bring it in. Because if it's on an existing property, usually the property owner will have some influence over that. So it might be kids of older parents. And the other advantage is that sometimes these kids, adult kids, will look after or provide services for the parents who might be aging, helping them with shopping and stuff like that. So it does have a social aspect as well. So I want you to know I'm very supportive of it, but we can't get into silliness. So however we can write it to make it happen.
Okay, I don't see any other hands for questions or clarification. Therefore, those that support option 1 for the tiny homes, which I'll reiterate is to treat tiny houses as dwelling units and permit them as a right in zones that permit residential uses, and this would be minimum planning. Please raise your hands. Opposed? So everybody is in support of option 1 for tiny homes. Yes. So up next is short-term rentals.
Okay, so we'll move on to short-term rentals. Short-term rentals are regulated by the province under the Short-Term Rentals Registration Act, and the province defines a short-term rental as a rental of less than a period of 28 consecutive days. Municipalities can also regulate short-term rentals. However, there are no minimum planning requirements to regulate short-term rentals at a municipal level. But I'll remind you that there is a statement of provincial interest on housing, and it has been observed by residents and levels of government in Canada that the comparative success of short-term rental market can reduce the availability of long-term rentals and also impact rental prices. So in the Osprey Village secondary planning area, the land use bylaw regulates short-term rentals in certain zones. So essentially the plan prevents a full unit from being rented for short-term rentals and states that a maximum of 3 rooms can be rented per unit. And so that leads us to the options. The first is that we could permit short-term rentals in all areas that permit residential uses. In other words, we would place no limitations on short-term rentals throughout the municipality. And the second option is still quite minimal, but it would regulate short-term rentals in the mixed-use service zone, which is a zone we discussed last week, to align with the Osprey Village secondary planning strategy. So we would restrict entire units from being rented as a short-term rental in the mixed-use service zone and would allow no more than 3 bedrooms in any unit to be rented for a short-term rental. So this would help to ensure that the area that can support density because it's serviced and therefore can support more housing facilitates housing for locals as opposed to some of those units going to Airbnbs.
Councillor Moore, then Councillor Oigel.
So what does this mean if your option 2 is what staff's recommending? What does this mean to way back in the woods, someone has a cottage that they rent out as an Airbnb. If option 2 goes forward, so that means they can only rent for how long?
So option 2 is specifically about properties in the mixed-use service zone, which is a very small area that we kind of showed on a map last week. It's very small. It basically complements the Osprey Village secondary planning area. And so you probably wouldn't see a cottage in the woods apply to that. But with this, so essentially, it wouldn't allow a full unit to be rented out as an Airbnb. It would only allow if the person has the primary residence, only a couple rooms would be allowed to be rented as the short-term rental, and not the full unit.
I will be, good.
Yeah, just in addition to what Rosemary had indicated, so it would just be the zone that we're in right now, Osprey Village, where we have the high residential areas, not any other part of the municipality. And it looks like Reed has a comment to say as well.
Sure, yeah. The intention with that, so the existing regulation which exists in the Osprey Village planning area, which we are in now, which that new zoning covering the area where Walmart is and Tim's on the other side. So that's the area we're talking about, nothing more than that unzoned portion that already is primarily built up already. And the idea is that these new kind of higher density rental units that are being built in here couldn't be used as for primary purpose as a short-term rental. People could rent out rooms, as Rosemary has mentioned, in their own apartment. But the idea is that although the money and resources that are being put into making sure we have these new rental units in this area, that they stay as long-term rentals and don't transition into people renting out units for Airbnb.
For right now, it's just this area here. It will not include hamlets in the future?
This is only for this area, correct?
Thank you.
We do have a couple other speakers, but could one of you bring up the map, maybe for Councillor Moore, so that we can see exactly what area before we're voting on or making a recommendation on this topic. Councillor Oikle.
So my concern when you're saying 3 bedrooms in any unit, so let's say a developer comes along and decides that they want to put in single units connected together, and then they're going to sell them. So they could sell each of those units to somebody, could be 10 of them. And then because they only have 1 or 2 or 3 bedrooms in, each of those 10 units can be a B&B. Like the whole thing could be a B&B.
Not according to option 2 and what's also in the Osprey Village secondary planning strategy. So that regulation applies to the full unit. So you couldn't rent out a full unit for an Airbnb is what this proposed regulation is saying. You couldn't rent out the entire unit. An individual would have to live in the unit, and they could rent out, say, a room for an Airbnb, but they couldn't rent out the entire unit.
Okay. All right. It just said it doesn't say the entire unit. It just says 3 bedrooms. So if I have a house with 3 bedrooms, then I'm renting out the 3 bedrooms, which is the entire unit.
You're correct, but the way it's worded, and it's just a summary there, so it would be trying to mimic what the regulations already exist in this part of Osprey Village. It's up to 3, but no matter what the case is, you have to live in that unit. Yeah, so it's just to prevent those apartments and houses that basically exist as a commercial property where no one ever lives there. And this is not to try to stop people from renting out rooms, which is kind of how a lot of those Airbnb and things like that started. It was people rent out a room or 2 from there, but they actually live there full time. That's the idea.
Well, so just to make sure that the present secondary planning strategy states you have to live in the house and you can rent out up to 3 bedrooms.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Reed, if you could speak to the slide that you brought up on the screen that shows the map, that might help confirm for those wondering what area this is proposed for.
Sure. So we're talking about the proposed mixed-use service zone. So that's the area in pink that we're looking at on the screen. The area in gray is the existing Osprey Village plan area. So our municipal building is up here in the corner. The new FH development is across the road over here. So we're talking about the pink area. So that's where Staples, Boston Pizza, Walmart, Tim's. That's the only area that would be covered by that zone. Yeah.
Councillor Hubley.
So before I vote in favor of option 1, I would like to hear what the councillor of the district sees the future being to help me with my decision.
When I look at this map, 2 things come up. One, mixed service, so there's going to be some residential there, and it's going to be more on McCullough Road. That's where people would put that in, but there's people are really looking at stuff with a commercial tinge, and B, we've invested a good deal of public money into this area to develop it, and I think that we've done so with the lens that it should benefit the entire municipality, and I'm not sure that someone building residential units for the purposes of just turning them into short-term rentals fulfills the goals that we're looking at as a council for development in the area, and that's why I'm going to go for option 2 in the mixed service zone here. If the option 2 applied to the entire municipality or expanded beyond that, no, but we've spent a huge amount of money on infrastructure there to develop this, and I'm not sure that someone buying a piece of land in there with the purposes of putting in Airbnbs is really why we spent the money there in the first place, and that's what's making my decision on it. And I'm also not sure that in practice it's going to restrict more than it's not going to be a large restriction on people, nor is it going to significantly change what most people are going to use this land for.
Councillor Smith.
Yeah, I'm okay with option 2. I do have some concerns about Airbnbs, but I think it's a complex issue. Like, I have concerns about Airbnbs throughout the district. But I think it's a complex issue, and we want to avoid getting into something that, we can't really manage through this process. So I'll be supporting option 2, but also just kind of bookmarking it for thinking through later with housing strategy and all that. Like, is this something that we need to return to? Also recognizing that, I'm not, I don't have a blanket opposition to Airbnbs. Like, I see them as very useful in places, but we may need some policy to prevent some of the whole homes being taken out of long-term housing in the future.
Councillor Bell.
Thank you. In any policy that we do up, we should be referring to these as short-term rentals, because Reddit, Cozy, Premier Suites, Airbnb, they're all franchises. So we've, on a slide, mentioned Airbnb. I'm a franchise owner of Airbnb, but I don't own any of the company. So it would be not necessarily correct to use that terminology.
Valid point, and I'm seeing nods from staff as well to make sure that that's reflected in the documents. Okay, I don't see any other hands, so there's 2 options before us. Option 1 was to permit short-term rentals in all areas that permit residential uses without regulating them further. And option 2 was to permit short-term rentals in all areas that permit residential uses, but regulate them in the mixed-use service zone in alignment with the Osprey Village secondary planning strategy. The staff recommendation is option 2. By a show of hands, we'll first go in order. Those in support of option 1, please raise your hand. Seeing none, those in support of option 2, unanimous support for that, so direction is given for option 2. The next topic is public health setbacks.
So planning staff met with staff from the Nova Scotia Health Authority over the summer of 2025 during our engagement activities, and they shared research outlining the importance of requiring setbacks between uses involving the production or sale of substances and institutional uses such as schools or hospitals. So the municipality could require setbacks for new development that would involve the sale of substances from existing institutional uses such as schools or hospitals. And that brings us to our two options. The first would be to not require any setbacks between institutional uses and uses that include the sale or production of substances such as alcohol, tobacco, or cannabis, and others. This would not require development to be set back from institutional uses. Option 2 is to require that a new development involving the sale or production of substances be set back from existing institutional uses at a distance that aligns with public health practices. And we would have to do more research to kind of determine that setback. This is the recommended option.
A quick question before we turn it over to the rest of council members for questions. So Osprey Village is not home to a liquor store. Would option 2 prevent that from happening, where we have a school on the other side?
It wouldn't necessarily outright prevent it, but it could require it to be set back from that use. So by a certain distance.
Yeah, is it in the secondary? Just to repeat what Jeff is adding, so the Osprey Village secondary plan area already has a similar requirement to have setbacks in place. So this would be probably something similar, again, in the area that we're looking and surrounding here. But if there were other areas in the municipality as well, it would apply a similar approach.
Councillor Oikel.
My concern is having tobacco in this because most convenience stores, which tend to be sometimes close to a school or a hospital, do sell cigarettes, right? Not that I'm in support of smoking or anything, but that is a reality, right? And so this would prohibit a convenience store from being near one of those things. And so with that in it, right, like I said, even though I'm not smoking, but that is the reality, I wouldn't be able to support number 2 because of the convenience stores, which are very good next to a school or near a hospital, right?
Just on that particular concern, if council wanted something in between these, a potential suggestion could be something that specifies that it's the primary use or the primary sale of those substances. So it would probably take away that issue of a convenience store because cigarettes are only one, or tobacco is only one thing that they sell. But like a liquor store or in Nova Scotia, NSLC sells liquor and cannabis. It would be addressing that, or like a brewery or something like that, where it's the primary sale of that product. So if that was the direction council wanted to go, we could modify this to kind of have something in between if that was desired.
Well, I would then support that.
Councillor Moore.
Is this mandatory coming from the province?
This would not be mandatory.
Okay, so I will be in favor of number 1, if any. I won't be in favor of a 1.5 or a 2. We are going above and beyond what we're required to do. I understand planning's doing their job, and as planners, you're doing a great job. But as representatives of the taxpayer in wanting economic development, I can't support this.
Councillor Smith.
Yeah, I just wondered about issues around like siting a new school in New Germany, for example. Like, how would that constrain sites that may be we don't know what's going on with the siting of the new school, but, it does seem to me that that we risk closing out some properties because of setbacks like this, and it would be great if there was walkability between the school and a small hamlet. So I'm kind of undecided, hoping to hear from others.
I can clarify that the way we were framing option 2 is that it would apply only to sellers or producers of substances. It wouldn't apply to the institutional uses. So in other words, we wouldn't say a new school would have to be set back from, say, an NSLC. We would say that the NSLC would have to, if they were coming in and there was already a school there, they would have to be set back from that use.
Mayor McLean-Weil?
I find it, first of all, I guess it's a question and then I can make a comment, but the only folks that raised this, let me reframe it. How widespread was this raised as an issue?
I would say not particularly widespread at all.
And if it was raised by Nova Scotia Health, I find it a little ironic that they would be asking municipalities to regulate this as opposed to thinking about what requirements they have in site selection and in future development around the schools or institutions. And I am getting a little tired of provincial agencies downloading responsibilities for tough decisions on municipal units. And I will not be supporting this, because I think if this is a mandate from health, then they should take control of making decisions around how they locate and how they restrict development around their own locations.
Councillor Moore.
Are we saying that we're just going to take the whole thing off by majority, by consensus, or do we have to just do number 1?
Option 1 would tell us that we're not putting anything in place.
Okay.
I don't have any other speakers, so I'll just review the options that we have. Option 1, not establish setbacks between institutional uses and uses that include the sale or production of substances such as alcohol, tobacco, and cannabis. And option 2, the staff recommended option, require that a new development involving the sale or production of substances such as alcohol, tobacco, and cannabis be set back from existing institutional uses at a distance that aligns with public health best practices. Those in support of option 1, please raise your hands. There is unanimous support for option 1. So there is your direction. Our next item is open space dedication.
Okay, so under the subdivision section of the Municipal Government Act, municipalities can require during the subdivision process parklet dedication or cash in lieu contributed to land supported for public good, so such as parks, trails, recreation, and or capital use for maintenance of existing amenities as communities grow. So how it works during the subdivision, there could be other dedicated piece of land, a part of that out of that land subdivided that goes into public use. Or if there is no land that municipalities wants to use because the land is not usable, then we can go through the cash in lieu process, where a certain percentage out of the how much that land is worth, there will be a cash in lieu of the subdivision, and that just helps to grow for a fund for new amenities that will not only rely on the taxpayers, existing taxpayers for those parks. So currently, MODL has around 2% cash in lieu process. Under the MGA, it allows to a maximum of 10%. So many municipalities usually go with 5%. So Queens County or Town of Bridgewater require 5%, whereas Kings County requires 10%. So it depends on the municipality and what they're requiring, and it could be either cash in lieu or parkland dedication. Usually, in order for it to be to use the piece of land, the land is supposed to be preferred, so it needs to be usable. It should be publicly accessible, and at least a part of that percentage could be if it's a piece of land that is located on the waterfront, that we should probably have like a waterfront piece that is dedicated for public use, or otherwise collect cash in lieu. And part of the cash in lieu or parkland dedication is strategically invested in order to acquire or improve open space, and it consists with MODL's open space strategic plan. Next slide, please. So there are three options. The first one is to maintain the current requirement, which is 2% cash in lieu, or land dedication, as long as that land is usable. And that is one option that could be that we can use and just use what we already have in our subdivision process. Option 2 is to increase open space dedication to 5% in all areas. So council may choose to increase the dedication requirement across the municipality so that all subdividers must provide 5% cash in lieu or 5% usable land, regardless of the designations or location. So in all zones, basically. And MODL would have the final determination whether to accept the land or to go with cash in lieu. So it will be council's decision to make. Option 3 is to go with increase the open space dedication requirements or cash in lieu. So cash in lieu require 10% of the assessed value of new lots in the Grove Center, so Osprey Village area, and Hamlet designations, and require 5% for all other designations for all other zones that are not the Grove Center or Hamlets. Land dedication requires 10% of the land being subdivided in Grove Centers and Hamlet designations, and or require 5% in all other designations. So it will be the same for either cash in lieu or land dedication. And Steffi's we'll suggest council consider going with option 3, as in the Grove Centers in Hamlet's areas, you might want to see more space for the public.
Thank you for presenting those. We'll put it out to council members for questions or comments. And just to reiterate, we currently do option 1, and then there's 2 other options to increase it to 5% or do the land or cash in lieu in option 3. So, questions, comments? Mayor McLean-Weil.
If you could just restate what municipalities have gone with 5%. It seems like we're a little behind, and
So under the Municipal Government Act, municipalities can request up to a maximum of 10% of either parkland dedication or cash in lieu. So for example, Kings is requiring 10% for either parkland dedication or cash in lieu. Queens and Town of Bridgewater, which are closer to us, technically also Kings, if I'm looking at the upper side of the municipality, are requesting 5%, either cash in lieu or parkland dedication. So we are behind in terms of the numbers where we currently have. So option 1 is what we have right now, and it's below what other municipalities and towns are having already in their municipal planning strategies.
Councillor Smith.
Can I just ask how it's been playing out in practice? Like, it seems to me, I don't know, I don't have a lot of background on this issue, but it seems, in my district, I see some subdivisions that have been put in, and there's just a lot put aside for open space dedication. Am I right? And sometimes, I don't know about the cash in lieu, but then sometimes that lot just kind of sits there, and people would like, later the community decides that they would like to use it, and do they purchase it back? Like, what's been happening with the lands? And I ask particularly with the subdivisions that are very rural, so there's a lot of open space, and then there's like these empty lots.
Historically, there was, I think that situation occurred more often. It became a lot more problematic, particularly on private roads, where those lots really aren't accessible to the public. And so they end up not getting used, and then they were sitting there, and in the case, there's some that have been sold off or subdivided and given to, sold to neighbors and things like that. So currently the practice is basically in almost all circumstances, it's the 2% is collected as cash rather than land, because that land is not desired, particularly in those rural subdivisions where there just isn't the need for a park space in that area, or the kind of funding that would go along with maintenance and everything like that. Because what cash in lieu of parkland allows you to do is to take that and put it into an existing park. So in a lot of communities, there is an existing park, and that money that comes from a new subdivision, wherever that is, can get put into new amenities and upkeep for the park that already is in that community. So some of this is about increasing the amount overall to bring it in line with most other municipalities in the province. But another part is to look a little bit more at the possibility of accepting land in some cases, particularly when we're looking at our growth centers. So, developments that are occurring in Osprey Village. We've got bigger developments in areas like Hebbville, and in areas like that where we're seeing, big proposals, and wanting to make sure that there's adequacy in terms of, big proposals in the parkland that should be included as a part of those, rather than being an afterthought or giving cash in lieu, but then there's no land to actually put the park that the community needs. So I think there's kind of two aspects of this. One would be providing that the policy to increase the overall amount, and then another piece saying that we should be open to accepting land in some cases where the municipality deems it appropriate, such as a growth center.
Councillor Brooks.
Thank you. Is there a minimum for a housing development? Is there a minimum size that would trigger the 2%? So, for example, someone builds a 4-unit development across the street from a park. Will that still require the 2% in that with simply with 4 houses? What is the number size? Is what I'm curious about.
Every lot. So to answer that question, every lot that gets created, as long as it's not being a piece being carved off and given to a neighbor, or if it's a piece being carved off for the creation of a private road. So there's some limitations about situations where a lot is created or subdivided that's not intended for development. That doesn't get captured in this. But if one lot is created for a new home, then 2% of that gets conveyed to the municipality. Now, if somebody does a development on one lot and never subdivides, so somebody wants to put in a 30-unit apartment building, because there's no subdivision, there's no dedication of this money, because that's a different process. This is set up, I think at a time when most growth was coming from single-family homes, and so the Municipal Government Act and all of the policies that were created were gearing all of this towards that classic kind of subdivision growth, where a new lot equaled a new house. So in situations like that is where the municipality collects money, but anything outside of the creation of a new lot to be built on, it doesn't get collected.
You mentioned that 2% was quite low compared to our neighboring municipal units. How long have we been at that 2% rate? And while our Director of Planning comes forward, option number 2 is essentially the same thing, just at a higher rate, maybe to reflect where we are today. Okay.
Yes. So a little bit about, to get right to your question, I think it was 2003 2003, around that time period, council switched from 5% only, and the threshold at that time, I believe it was 6 lots. A subdivision over 6 lots required 5%. Council did a study, realized that, hey, we have 80 lots, only 3 have been developed over 30 years. We need to change what we're doing. So to ease the transition, council decided they wanted to do 2% cash only and remove that 6 lot threshold. So it's like any lots being created, it's 2%. And that was done back probably in 2003. If it wasn't 2003, it was 2002-ish. It's been a while.
Well over 20 years ago. Okay. Thank you for clarifying that. Councillor Oikel.
So the only difference between 2 and 3 is that in growth centers, it would be 10%. But you have hamlets in there too, and hamlets are a lot smaller. Again, I'm thinking of New Germany and possibly Petite area. And I don't know if the 10%, because they're already rural, right? And that there's already lots of open space in those areas, if it should be added in there. And so those people that have those hamlets, possible hamlets in their areas, I would be interested in knowing what they think about the possibility of 10% of the land of a subdivision in that area, those areas being put towards parks or the money instead of just the 5%.
Councillor Moore.
I think we should stay with number 1, and not only because number 1 on these things was my most preferred one, but I think that leaving the 2% as of now, I think we're laying enough on development and people wanting to move forward with developing properties. I think when this document comes out, draft 2, I think people are going to see that hopefully that we've done the minimal that we have to do, and I think changing this to 10% is too much for right now. So I am supporting keeping it at number 1. Thank you.
Councillor Smith.
Just to clarify, this policy wouldn't be triggered by cluster developments.
No, it would not, because it is not subdivision.
Any other comments from council members? Councillor Burns.
Listen, I'm probably one of the first people at the table who's willing to spend money on parks. It's one of the things I ran on and everything else. But for me, if we're spending money on parks, that can be an overall policy decision that we're making here. We're looking at other areas as a council where we're going to be increasing our revenue growth. At this time, I don't want to put an additional cost on further development in the municipality for people who are building homes. We're looking to do that. I'm not sure that this will overall make a huge difference in the funding that comes in that we couldn't otherwise just choose to make a policy decision on through budgeting processes if we saw the need to develop parks in certain areas. And at this time, I'm not sold on well, everyone else is doing 5%, so we should go to that, because if that's the case, then most people are doing deed transfer taxes at 1.5%. We should also go to that. We have made decisions as a municipality to set things a little bit lower than others for reasons. If in the future we want to come back to this when we start talking about our open park strategy and what we want to do, I'd be more open to the conversation then. But at this point, I'm just not willing to blanket add the 3%.
I don't have any other speakers. I'm not going to review the 3 options because they are rather lengthy, but for anybody listening who wants to read more in the background and all the options, they are in our agenda package. So option number 1, show of hands of those who are in favor of option number 1. There's 4. Option number 2. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm going to go back to option number 1 for a second just to make sure. 5. Yes. Option number 2. 5. And option number 3. So we are tied, 5 in favor of option 1, 5 in favor of option 2. Councillor Bell.
I'm not voting for option 3. I keep hearing the question, well, what is the other municipalities doing? What are people doing around it? Now we have the opportunity to go with number 2 and make it a matching, but you're making it more complicated by not doing it. So don't ask the question anymore today, what's the people around us doing?
So your, excuse me, your subdivision, am I okay to talk in the mic?
Yes.
All right. Your subdivision bylaw currently provides 2%, so in the absence of direction, there'd be no change to the current subdivision regulations.
Okay.
Pardon? Well, it depends on how you put forward the motion. If it was motion 1, 5-5, it loses. Motion 2, 5-5, it loses. But you have a status quo that's currently in your subdivision bylaw. So unless there's someone willing to change their vote, there's an absence of direction in this one.
Thank you for confirming that. And then for the record, option 1 is the one that staff will put forward in that document. And our final discussion today is around signage.
Thank you. So yeah, moving on to signage. Signage supports economic development, tourism, wayfinding, as well as contributing to a sense of place. While signage is a common element in our communities, it's not always compatible with its surroundings and can even create safety concerns. For example, having excessive signage in residential neighborhoods or having illuminated or moving signs that distract traffic. Signage requirements can help to ensure that signs are safe and appropriate, helping to fit in with the aesthetics of an area. Many buildings throughout the municipality have valuable historic character. Signage guidelines for historic buildings can help maintain and preserve this character. These guidelines would encourage the use of historically compatible design elements where applicable, without requiring business owners to meet overly strict requirements or standards. Many land use bylaws throughout Nova Scotia include general provisions for signage that address permitted or prohibited signs that apply to all lands throughout the municipality. These provisions help to provide a sense of clarity around what signs do or do not require a development permit. And they help to explicitly state the types of signs that aren't or are allowed. For example, signs that promote hatred or signs that are discriminatory. In terms of having additional signage requirements beyond just general provisions, a range of factors can be addressed. For example, the size, the height, or the quantity of a sign. These requirements can either apply everywhere or only to certain zones. So thinking back to draft 1, the draft included an approach where additional signage requirements applied to only the built-up areas, so the mixed-use service zone and hamlet areas. And then signs for home-based businesses were limited to other specific requirements. And just for clarification, signs that are located within road right-of-ways would not fall under municipal jurisdiction, so they would not be subject to any regulations that council decides to put in place. So moving on to the options. So option 1 is to have no signage requirements that apply anywhere in the municipality. So this would mean that no general provisions for any signage or design guidelines for historical buildings would be included. There would also be no additional signage requirements that applied to specific zones. So things like size, sign height, size, or the number of signs would not be regulated. So basically this option is saying that signs would not be addressed in the plan at all. And then option 2 is to include general provisions for signage and signage design guidelines for historic buildings, but to not have specific sign requirements for certain zones. So this would mean that the land use bylaw would include general provision section that addresses signage for the entire municipality, and it would cover things like prohibited signs, permitted signs, and the illumination of signs. It would also include design guidelines for historic buildings. However, it would not include zone-specific signage requirements. So yeah, that would not be included in option 2. And then option 3 is to include general provisions for signage, signage design guidelines for historic buildings, and to have specific signage provisions that apply to certain zones. So this option is similar to the second option presented. General provisions for signage would be included, but it would also mean that some zones would be subject to additional signage requirements. So again, height, size, or quantity could be regulated in more built-up areas. And then just to mention, so staff recommend option 3 to have general provisions for signage that apply to all zones and to have additional signage requirements that apply to certain zones. So specifically the mixed-use service zone and the areas that end up being zoned hamlet or village. Including general provisions for signage would promote safety and provide clear guidance on signage to residents and business owners. Signage design guidelines for historic buildings would encourage the use of historic elements without being overly strict, as these would just be recommendations. And lastly, having zone-specific signage requirements that apply to the more rapidly growing built-up areas would help guide development so that signs can be cohesive with existing community character. Thank you.
Thank you. So currently we do not have a policy in place for signage. Option 1 would continue that. Option 2 would give some provisions around historic buildings, and option 3 would relate to more all signage, essentially, in the municipality. Councillor Moore.
So I take it none of these things we're discussing today are mandatory from the province? No. Okay, thank you. And let's just say option 2 or option 3 went through. Who pays for these signs?
The commercial businesses wanting to put up the signs. So if you had Bob's Burgers on Highway 10 and they wanted to put up a sign, they would be paying for the sign, and be the responsibility on them.
Are we saying if they want to, or are we making them?
If they want to. So this would be in the case where someone wants to put a sign up for their business or something like that. This would just provide guidance on what signs would be permitted, wouldn't be permitted, and that would only apply in option 3. Mm-hmm. So basically, just to elaborate a little bit on option 2, as you mentioned, so that would cover the entire municipality, but basically the sections in the bylaw, which is pretty standard with other municipalities as well, it basically just lists out signage that would be permitted or wouldn't be permitted, types of signage that would require a development permit or wouldn't be requiring a development permit. So it doesn't really provide guidance on size or projection or illumination or things like that. It's more just about saying, like, for example, election signs are permitted and do not require a development permit. So it just helps to provide a bit of clarity around signage in the bylaw.
So you said if it was put in place, it would be mandatory for hamlets?
Sorry, what option would you be referring to? Because that would only apply to option 3.
Okay.
So,
all right.
And that's flexible as well. Like if council felt that signage provisions should only apply specifically to, say, the mixed-use service zone, we could kind of work that in as well. Just referencing draft 1, that's what we had originally proposed, was applying signage guidelines to the built-up areas.
And let's just say number 3 did go in place. It's moving forward from here. It's not making people that already have signs to change their signs according to this policy. Thank you.
Yeah, right now, with no regulations in place, businesses put up their signs as they want. However, most of our roads are provincial roads, and therefore they would have to abide by their regulations when putting the sign up, just to clarify that. Councillor Brooks, you're up next.
I guess I'm curious if the district has had any sign complaints over the years, because I'm always wondering, are we dealing with the problem? Are we anticipating a problem, or are we creating a problem? And I don't know if this is a problem, if it has historically been a problem here. I would also be curious to know what other levers we might, be able to throw. If somebody puts up a giant neon sign, does that then fall under public nuisance, or are there other levers that we can throw? I'm leaning towards option one here, largely because we're focused on economic development and the idea of more hoops for people to jump in if this is not a real issue. I just don't want to add more layers. So I guess I need to know the history a little bit. Thank you.
I think our Director of Planning will take that. And to give you an example of something I know we heard in our last council term was coming off exit 10 and the amount of signs that are there, but it's within the right-of-way of Department of Transportation. So it's their regulations that it falls under. But I'll let Jeff speak further to that.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. So we do receive complaints from community groups and members of the public. Most of the time, those are in the provincial public highway, which we're not regulating those. So we basically tell them there's nothing we can currently do. If it's on private land and it's outside of a planned area, again, we have no planning. We're not regulating signs. It's not for us to do that. If you put sign regulations in place, then you would be responsible for those on private lands. The exits, I'm thinking maybe it's the Blockhouse one, the community. We were at a public meeting, planning meeting, and the members brought up about complaints about the signage, and transportation was there, and the regional manager at the time took that back, and I believe they did address those community concerns for that area of Blockhouse. But there are other areas over the years that we've received complaints, and we haven't had anything, so we're not regulating the signs. So,
Councillor Oikel.
All right. So, excuse me, number 2, or would it be number 3, that would say within a subdivision, a person who has a home-based business we would have regulations as to the size of sign they could put on their lawn. Is that what this is about?
No, so home-based businesses would be addressed separately in the document, so they wouldn't fall under the signage provisions, even with option 2.
Just to add to that, and that's partly based on the feedback that was already provided from council about home-based businesses. So the first draft did have some requirements around signage in that section. That's no longer going to exist in the second draft. So the second draft, home-based businesses stuff will be very, very limited. It's not going to get into signs. Option 2 does not require that people come in and get a permit for a sign or anything. It basically lists a whole bunch of stuff that is kind of common sense to what people would imagine you shouldn't be doing, putting like a big sign that says, look over here, or something that's a distraction, or putting a stop sign in front of their house, or things like that, that is almost like, of course you wouldn't do that, but it just spells it out more clearly, or spells out things like Anna said, that yes, you can have an election sign, yes, you can have lots of different kinds of signs. Almost every land use bylaw that we're aware of has that basic stuff in it. It just outlines kind of common sense, I would say, what stuff you shouldn't have that is going to cause people to have a car accident, and what stuff you'd think, yes, you should be allowed to have. The piece about historic buildings, there's some, and this was what was in draft 1, these are just recommendations. So if people are in a community like La Have or Blockhouse or whatever it is, and they want to, fit in with the historic character, there's some guidelines that say, here's some suggestions. Nothing's mandatory. So option 2 is really just basic stuff that wouldn't really get into, you have to do this and that, and there's no permitting. Option 3 involves that step of actually saying, here's how many signs and what size they can be in certain areas. So that's maybe helpful to talk about the difference between those two.
Do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, thank you. So number 2 then could, considering our present climate within the world, stop people from putting up inappropriate signs, racist signs, signs that demean other people, or Like, that would be part of it, right?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
And who regulates those signs for those that put up the derogatory signs about world leaders? Who regulates that and goes out to say, take your sign down? I just anticipate it being a very potentially dangerous thing for a person to have to regulate that.
In this case, the land use bylaw would be administered by the development officer. So the municipality, kind of our staff, has the authority to regulate similar to other uses and requirements under a land use bylaw. So technically that authority does live within the development officer's role, is to administer and provide that regulation. When we're talking about those types of things, those fall into that category of, people aren't applying for a permit. So it's not like it's coming on someone's desk and they're looking at it and saying, yeah, this is okay. Those are the kinds of things under the bylaw that are regulated, but they're not going to be out looking for them. It would be, if someone had a major concern and they could highlight it, and then if staff were to look at it and say, yeah, that doesn't meet such and such. But I think that would be kind of an unusual circumstance to have that type of thing come up, because there wouldn't be a permit process involved.
From my own perspective, it sounds confusing, and while I may or may not agree with the signs, I have a hard time with saying we're going to go on somebody's property and take up their sign, just my own personal view. I have Councillor Bell, Burns, and Smith.
Thank you. Currently, within MODL's development agreement process, I think that signs and lighting may have some requirements. It comes to mind of business development agreements for a business in Blockhouse and another business in Hebville. I'm not naming the businesses, but I can. I think that we had restrictions on things like height, and so would those stay in place, or would, if you went with option one, would you lose that ability? So then I would say we currently already have like option two in place, but we don't really enforce it unless it's a strategic or substantial change in a community. I don't know if I got that worded right, but that's how I view it, and I'm safe with option two that way. But I don't want to go in and regulate someone's sandwich sign because they cut someone's hair or something like that. I think it comes down to being reasonable.
Just to address, I think, your question about development agreements, that's correct. So the development agreement process is quite open, and it's a negotiation. So the municipality has the ability to look at that, as well as a whole bunch of other things like landscaping or even hours of operation, that all of that can be built into that agreement. So that wouldn't be lost with option one. Development agreements always can contain various elements such as signage. And then, so that's always an option, but it would have to be a development agreement to get into that level.
Councillor Burns.
Thank you. Mine is more informational question, just so I understand what it is that I'm addressing with this. So I know, like, in the provincial right-of-way, like, that's their jurisdiction. When would this really be ours? I guess I'm looking for a better example, because I know there's some communities where, like, yeah, you're not going to put a sign on the ground in front of the business unless the province says, but if you hang one off your building, is that what we are then looking at? How does that, because I'm just thinking about the mostly provincial roads to the area, and at what point are we, what is it we're actually targeting with this to remedy, I guess is what I'm trying to understand.
I guess the main focus, like as you mentioned, it's not including roads, so private lands, and more specifically, like commercial signage would be the the focus.
Just to add to what Anna was saying, most of the signs that you'll see, like the bigger ones, are going to be on private lands, because they'll know where the property line is, and they'll put, particularly if you're thinking like some of the big retail stuff out here. Particularly option 3 would have some guidelines about when you see one of those big, signs that's metal poles and everything, and they've got various businesses on them. It would have some guidelines around how those are constructed. Those are on private property, and it would outline, how many signs can some of these properties have. So what it's trying to avoid is you can have there's large properties with different commercial businesses in them, and you might have 5 or 10 signs, and it's actually there's so many that it actually loses its effect, and it's very difficult for people to even know what's there. So some controls over how many signs, and that's basically encouraging them to have the big sign with multiple businesses on it, so that people who are driving by 50 and 60 kilometers an hour can see that's where these various businesses are. And so it gives you some control over those. And then, the other pieces around historic stuff is more just guidelines for historic communities.
Thank you. And again, just this is my understanding. So there's going to be some areas where the private property goes historically right up to where the road is, and then there's some areas where the provincial right-of-way is actually quite wide before, and there's areas where you will still need a permit from the province regardless of whether it's your land or the provincial land, because that right-of-way will be at least 33 feet from the center line no matter what. In that case, whether it's private land or whether I guess that's the case where I'm getting at. If I'm going through La Have, right, and I'm going down past the bakery, and the road is right there, but that you need a permit pretty much until the end of the buildings to do anything from the province. Would this still impact that, or is this on private land we would do this, and it is what I would consider the provincial PID that the road would be on that the province would only apply to?
Yeah, so this is this would only be on the private lands, because the province is going to have the control what happens in their right of way. They don't always necessarily enforce the rules that they have, yes, as we know, but this would not regulate in those cases where you're right up, the building's right at, or maybe on the provincial right of way. Yeah. In those circumstances, the province would be the jurisdiction. Gotcha. Having that control. And then we're back from that. Yeah, exactly. Okay. It would be really what happens on the private lands, yeah.
Thank you very much.
And Councillor Smith.
Yeah, just to go back to a point that Councillor Weichel had made about what signs would be prohibited. There's been 2 situations in my district this year where people have put up signs that are inappropriate to verging on offensive, and I've had calls from residents who want to know, isn't there anything that can stop these signs from going up? And I'll just, they're very public, so I don't see why I couldn't mention them. But one, for example, someone had a problem with the fire department and put up a series of signs on their property kind of slandering the fire department with profanity, insults, and there's nothing we can do to even say, that shouldn't be there. So I think I would, and then another situation, signs are put up that people are feeling like the signs are luring people to a property that is not necessarily safe. And these ongoing issues, these are the situations where people come to you and there's just nothing in your bylaws that can touch it. So I would like to see some general provisions around prohibited signs. Not that we get into policing every little thing, but that there's something for very egregious cases, especially like the first one that I mentioned. But I don't want to see overly detailed regulations for commercial businesses. That doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, just if I can comment on that. So The signage generally is for marketing and advertising for businesses. The law of the land, the charter, says you have the right for freedom of expression. We are significantly reduced in our ability to regulate expression. So it's more likely than not, if you are advertising an opinion, be it political or otherwise, it would be outside our jurisdiction to be able to regulate that through land use planning. If it's defamatory, there's a civil remedy. But I would be reluctant for council to be of the view that the popular F. Trudeau sign hanging from a house, it's unlikely that we'd be able to regulate that because it is a political expression, although vulgar and profane. It's nonetheless political expression. So what we would focus on is regulating business advertising, commercial marketing, as opposed to trying to regulate political opinion or freedom of expression.
Okay, I withdraw that then.
Thank you. That's really good information to have. I have one more speaker, and then we'll then we'll discuss what options go forward. And covered. Okay. So 3 options before us. The details are in our agenda package. Those who are in favor of option number 1, to have no signage requirements that apply anywhere in the municipality, please raise your hands. You got that number? Okay. Those in favor of option 2, and those in favor of option 3. So, option 1 is the direction that you have. This concludes our agenda in total today, and thank you for those who have bared with us as we made our way through the technical issues this morning. But before we adjourn, I'm going to turn it over to Mayor McLean-Weil, who will give us our year-end wishes for the end of the year.
This is our last official meeting as a council for 2025. And for those who may be listening, I personally want to wish everyone the very best of the season. And just a very significant thank you to council members who have worked so diligently over the last year. There have been a lot of extra meetings and extra work that's been required because of the commitments we made as a council, and I really appreciate that work. And subsequently, the work we did resulted in our staff being very busy this year, and particularly around the issues we've been talking about this morning on municipal planning strategy. They have responded in a very timely fashion to the requests we've made and have endured some very difficult conversations with residents and with us as we worked our way through this. So as we conclude 2025, we kind of close the book, or turn the page on draft 1 of our municipal planning strategy, and we'll await the draft 2 as it comes forward to the next chapter in this ongoing book, which we hope we can conclude, and will work diligently to conclude by the late spring, early summer. I'm hesitant to put an actual date to that, but we'll leave it with some flexibility. But it is a season for us to spend time with family and friends, and I hope that all of us can take a little breath and not think about all of our council activities. Enjoy the weather, which appears it's going to be a white Christmas, maybe, we'll hope. And today we will join with our staff and enjoy a dinner at the Tri-District Fire Hall. So my personal best to all of you, and looking forward to 2026 and all that is ahead, because there is more to come, folks.
And with that, I'll call this meeting adjourned. Thank you.